The storm had been following Alex Chen for the better part of 3 hours, its dark tendrils stretching across the October sky like grasping fingers. Lightning illuminated the winding mountain road in violent, stuttering bursts, revealing glimpses of the valley below where the Riverside Hotel sat like a forgotten relic against the churning waters of Mill Creek. Alex pulled his rental car into the gravel parking lot, the headlights cutting through sheets of rain that hammered against the windshield with an almost musical rhythm. The hotel looked exactly as it had in the faded photograph on the booking website. A three-story Victorian structure with peeling white paint and dark shutters that hung askew like drooping eyelids. Gothic spires reached toward the storm clouds, and a wraparound porch sagged under the weight of decades and neglect. He had chosen this place specifically for its isolation, its distance from everything and everyone he was trying to escape. The divorce papers were still fresh in his briefcase, alongside the termination letter from the law firm where he'd spent the last 8 years of his life. Sarah's words echoed in his memory. "You're not the man I married, Alex. You're hollow, empty, like you're not even there anymore." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps that's exactly what he needed to be right now. Not there, not anywhere that mattered. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Alex gathered his single suitcase from the trunk and sprinted toward the hotel's entrance. The wooden steps creaked ominously under his weight, and he noticed that several of the porch boards had rotted through completely, revealing glimpses of the dark space beneath. The front door was heavy oak, studded with iron hinges that had turned green with age. A brass nameplate read, "Riverside Hotel, established 1892," in elegant script, though the lettering had worn thin in places. Alex pressed the bell button, but heard no chime from within. After a moment, he tried the door handle and found it unlocked. The lobby hit him with the smell of old wood, musty fabric, and something else, something vaguely sweet and cloying that reminded him of wilted flowers. The interior was a time capsule from another era, burgundy wallpaper with gold fleur-de-lis patterns, dark mahogany furniture that gleamed dully in the lamplight, and a grand staircase that curved upward into shadow. Behind an ornate reception desk sat an elderly woman, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and her weathered hands moving with a subtle tremor as she turned the pages of a leather-bound ledger. She looked up as Alex approached, and he was struck by her eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, like chips of winter sky. "Mr. Chin," she said, without him having to introduce himself. Her voice was soft, but carried clearly in the silence. "I've been expecting you." "Have you?" Alex set down his suitcase and approached the desk. "I made the reservation online just this afternoon." "Oh, we've been expecting you much longer than that." The woman's smile was warm, but somehow unsettling, as if she knew something he didn't. "I'm Mrs. Holloway, the proprietress. I do hope your journey wasn't too difficult. The storm tonight is unusually intense." Alex glanced back toward the windows, where rain continued to lash against the glass. "It followed me most of the way up the mountain. I was starting to think I might have to sleep in the car." "Oh, we couldn't have that." Mrs. Holloway opened the ledger and ran her finger down a page filled with entries in spidery handwriting. "I have you down for our finest accommodations. Room 606, 6th floor. It has a lovely view of the creek, and it's very private." Something in her tone made Alex pause. "Is there something wrong with the room?" Mrs. Holloway's pale eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. For a long moment, she seemed to be studying him, weighing him somehow. Then her expression softened,
and she reached beneath the desk to produce an old-fashioned brass key attached to a faded red tassel. She said, "Not wrong, precisely. It's just that, well, room 606 has a rather unique history. Most guests find it quite memorable." "What kind of history?" The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she set the key on the desk between them. The previous guest in that room, well, let's just say his stay ended rather abruptly. Checkout was much sooner than expected. Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with his rain-soaked clothes. What happened to him? Nothing happened to him. Rather, something happened around him. The room has a way of revealing things, hidden things, things that perhaps should remain hidden. Despite himself, Alex felt a spark of curiosity, the first genuine emotion he had experienced in weeks. What kind of things? Mrs. Holloway leaned forward conspiratorially, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Room 606 has been many things over the years, Mr. Chen. A sanctuary, a prison, a confessional, but most of all, it's been a mirror. And sometimes, when we look too long into mirrors, we see things we'd rather not see." The rational part of Alex's mind, the lawyer's mind that had served him well for so many years, told him to ask for a different room, to politely decline and find somewhere else to spend the night. But the emptiness that Sarah had seen in him, the hollow space where his emotions used to be, seemed to resonate with something in the old woman's words. "I'll take it," he said, reaching for the key. Mrs. Holloway's fingers closed over his for just a moment as he lifted the key from the desk. Her skin was ice cold, and he could feel the tremor in her hands more clearly now. Not the tremor of age, he realized, but of fear. "Room 606, she whispered, and her grip tightened on his hand. "No one stays there twice, Mr. Chen. Do you understand? No one comes back." Alex pulled his hand free, the brass key warm against his palm, despite having been touched by those cold fingers. He said, "I understand," though he wasn't sure he did. "The elevator is there," Mrs. Holloway gestured toward an ornate cage lift in the corner of the lobby. "But I should mention, it's been a bit temperamental lately. Sometimes it stops on floors where it shouldn't. Sometimes it takes passengers where they didn't intend to go. I'll take the stairs." "That might be wise." The old woman settled back in her chair, her pale eyes never leaving his face. "There's a house phone in your room, Mr. Chen. If you need anything during the night, anything at all, don't hesitate to call the front desk. I'll be here." "All night?" "Oh, yes," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "I'm always here at night. The day shift is for the living, you see. The night shift, well, that requires different qualifications entirely." Alex picked up his suitcase, the weight of it somehow heavier than it had been moments before. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. I'll see you in the morning." "Perhaps," she said, already turning back to her ledger. "But morning is still many hours away, and room 606 has a way of making hours feel like lifetimes." The grand staircase was wider than it had appeared from the lobby, with a rich burgundy carpet runner that muffled Alex's footsteps as he climbed. The banister was smooth mahogany, worn by countless hands over the decades, and oil paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern-faced men and women in Victorian dress, their eyes seeming to follow his progress up the stairs. The second floor was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast dancing shadows along the hallway. Alex could hear the storm continuing outside, but the sound seemed muffled here, as if the hotel itself was absorbing the noise. He passed several doors, room 201, 202, 203, each marked with brass numbers that gleamed dully in the lamplight. The fifth floor was different from the others. The hallway was longer, stretching away into darkness that the wall sconces couldn't quite penetrate. The carpet was darker too, not burgundy but deep crimson, like dried blood. And the air here carried that same sweet, cloying smell he'd noticed in the lobby, but stronger now, more oppressive. Alex paused at the foot of the final flight of stairs leading to the sixth floor. Something felt wrong about going higher, as if he were climbing not just stairs, but something else entirely, a ladder leading away from the world he knew and understood.
Room 606 was larger than Alex had anticipated, with tall windows that should have offered a view of the creek, but instead showed only darkness. Not the darkness of night, but something deeper, more complete, as if the windows opened onto a void rather than the storm outside. The furnishings were elegant but outdated. A four-poster bed with heavy crimson curtains, a mahogany armoire that dominated one wall, a writing desk positioned beneath the windows, and in the corner, an old rotary telephone sitting on a small table like some relic from a museum. But it was the walls that captured Alex's attention. They were covered in what appeared to be hundreds of photographs, all of them black and white, all of them showing the same room from different angles and different time periods. In some photos, the room was occupied by men in Victorian dress. In others, women in flapper-era clothing posed stiffly beside the bed. Still others showed more modern guests, men in suits from the 1950s and 60s, couples from the 1970s and 80s. All of them had one thing in common: their eyes. Every person in every photograph had the same expression, a look of dawning horror, as if they had just seen something that shouldn't exist. Alex set down his suitcase and moved closer to examine the photographs. The faces were different, but that expression was identical across decades of guests. In the corner of each photo, in spidery handwriting, were dates and names. Harold Whitmore, October 13th, 1923. Margaret Finch, December 2nd, 1931. Robert and Helen Carver, June 15th, 1957. The most recent photograph showed a man who looked remarkably similar to Alex himself. The same dark hair, the same build, even the same style of clothing. The name written beneath read, James Morrison, October 30th, 2024, just 2 weeks ago. Jesus, Alex muttered, studying the photo more closely. James Morrison's expression was the most terrifying of all. Not just horror, but a kind of desperate plea, as if he were trying to communicate something urgent to whoever might look at his picture later. Thunder crashed outside and the lights in the room flickered momentarily. In that brief moment of semi-darkness, Alex could have sworn he saw movement in one of the photographs, just a subtle shift as if James Morrison had turned his head slightly to look directly at him. But when the light steadied, the photo was exactly as it had been before. Alex shook his head and turned away from the wall of photographs. The stress of the divorce, the job loss, the long drive, it was all catching up with him. He needed sleep, not paranoid delusions about moving pictures. He unpacked his few belongings quickly, hanging his spare shirt in the armoire and placing his toiletries on the writing desk. The armoire creaked as he opened it, and he noticed that it smelled strongly of that same sweet, cloying odor he'd been detecting throughout the hotel. When he looked inside, he saw why. The armoire was filled with clothes that weren't his. Dozens of garments from different eras, all hanging neatly on wooden hangers. Victorian suits, flapper dresses, modern business attire. At the very front hung a suit that looked exactly like the one James Morrison had been wearing in his photograph. Alex slammed the armoire shut and stepped back, his heart pounding.
This was insane. He was in a hotel room that apparently serves as some kind of museum for previous guests, surrounded by their photographs and their belongings, as if they had simply disappeared. He moved to the telephone, intending to call the front desk and demand an explanation. The rotary telephone was heavy in his hands, its black bakelite surface worn smooth by decades of use. He lifted the receiver and began to dial the operator. The line was dead. No, not dead. As Alex held the phone to his ear, he could hear something on the other end. Not a dial tone, but a soft sound like breathing or whispering. He couldn't make out words, but there was definitely someone or something on the other end of the line. "Hello?" he said into the receiver. The whispering stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, very softly, a voice spoke from the receiver. "You shouldn't have come here." Alex nearly dropped the phone. The voice was male, cultured, with a slight accent he couldn't place. But there was something wrong with it, a hollow quality, as if it were coming from very far away or from someone whose mouth was full of cotton. "Who is this?" Alex demanded. "Someone who tried to leave. Someone who couldn't." The line went dead with a soft click. Alex set the phone back in its cradle with shaking hands. The rational part of his mind insisted that this had to be some kind of elaborate prank, maybe the hotel's way of entertaining guests, playing up the haunted atmosphere for tourists who enjoyed a good scare. But the voice had sounded so genuine, so filled with regret and warning, and the photographs on the walls, the clothes in the armoire. Thunder crashed again, closer this time, and the lights flickered more violently. In the moments of near darkness, Alex thought he saw the photographs on the walls shift and move, the faces turning to watch him, their expressions of horror deepening. He rubbed his eyes hard and shook his head. Exhaustion, that's all it was. He'd been driving for hours in a storm, dealing with more stress than any person should have to handle. His mind was playing tricks on him. What he needed was sleep, a good night's rest, and in the morning he would wake up refreshed and rational, able to laugh at his own paranoia. Alex changed into his pajamas and brushed his teeth in the small bathroom adjacent to the bedroom. The bathroom was as elegantly appointed as the rest of the room, with a clawfoot tub and an ornate mirror above a marble sink. But as he brushed his teeth, he noticed something odd about his reflection. It seemed delayed. When he moved his head to the left, his reflection followed a fraction of a second later. When he raised his toothbrush, the reflection did the same, but not quite in sync. It was subtle, so subtle he might have missed it if he hadn't been looking directly at the mirror, but it was definitely there. Alex experimented, waving his hand back and forth quickly. His reflection matched the movement, but always just a split second behind, as if the mirror was showing him not what he was doing, but what he had done moments before. Or as if the reflection was someone else entirely, someone who looked like him but wasn't quite him, someone who was mimicking his movements but couldn't quite keep up. "Stop it," Alex told himself firmly. "You're being ridiculous." He finished brushing his teeth and returned to the bedroom, determinedly not looking at any of the photographs on the walls. The four-poster bed was comfortable with crisp white sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. He pulled the heavy crimson curtains closed around the bed, creating a small private space within the larger room. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the curtained bed, Alex felt insulated from the chaos. The darkness was complete, and the sounds of rain and wind were muffled to a gentle murmur. For the first time in weeks, he felt himself beginning to relax. Sleep came quickly, but it was not restful.
Alex dreamed of drowning. He was underwater, sinking slowly through dark depths while figures swam around him in the murky distance. They looked human from far away, but as they drew closer, he could see that something was wrong with them. Their faces were blurred, as if they were photographs that had been left too long in water, and their eyes were too large, too bright, too knowing. They reached for him with pale hands that seemed to stretch impossibly long, and as their fingers touched his skin, he felt not cold, but a terrible warmth,
as if they were drawing heat from his body and leaving nothing but emptiness behind. One of the figures swam closer than the others, and Alex recognized the face from the photograph on the wall. James Morrison, his features waterlogged and distorted, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, as if he were trying to speak. "Leave now," Morrison's voice echoed through the water, though his lips didn't match the words. "Leave now, before it's too late." But when Alex tried to swim upward, toward what he hoped was the surface, he found that he couldn't move. His arms and legs felt heavy, sluggish, as if the water around him were thickening into something more like syrup or blood. The other figures pressed closer, their faces becoming clearer as they approached. Alex recognized them from the photographs. Harold Whitmore with his Victorian whiskers, Margaret Finch with her bob haircut and beaded necklace, Robert and Helen Carver holding hands even in death. "One of us," they whispered in unison, their voices creating a chorus that resonated through the dark water. "Join us, stay with us, become one of us." Alex tried to scream, but water rushed into his mouth, choking him, filling his lungs with liquid darkness. He was drowning, and the figures were watching with those terrible bright eyes, waiting for him to stop struggling, waiting for him to accept what they had already accepted. He woke gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was dark, the heavy curtains around the bed blocking out any light that might have been filtering in from outside. Alex could still hear the storm, but it sounded different now, not the chaotic violence of before, but something more rhythmic, more purposeful, like a deliberate drumbeat. He pushed back the curtains and sat up in bed, trying to orient himself. The red glow of the digital clock on the nightstand read 12 o'clock a.m. exactly. Midnight. The witching hour, as his grandmother used to say. The thought had barely formed in his mind when the telephone began to ring. Not the electronic trill of a modern phone, but the mechanical bell of the old rotary phone, harsh and insistent in the darkness. Alex stared at it for a moment, remembering the voice he'd heard earlier, the warning that had seemed so genuine. The telephone continued to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, Alex reached for it. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Not the breathing or whispering he'd heard before, but complete, absolute silence, the kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive, as if it were pushing against his eardrums. "Hello?" he said again, more forcefully. When the voice finally came, it was so soft he had to strain to hear it. "Leave now." It was the same voice from before, male, cultured, hollow. But now Alex could hear something else in it, something that made his blood run cold. Desperation. And beneath that, a kind of terrible sadness, as if the speaker were mourning something that could never be recovered. "Who is this?" Alex demanded. "What do you want?" "I want to save you," the voice whispered. "I want to spare you what happened to me, what happened to all of us." "All of who? The people in the photographs?" "The guests," the voice confirmed. "The ones who stayed in room 606, the ones who thought they could leave." Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. What happened to them? "What's happening to you?" The voice was growing fainter now, as if the speaker were moving away from the phone, or as if the connection were weakening. "The room, it remembers everyone who stays here. It collects them, keeps them." "That's impossible." "Look at the photographs again," the voice urged. "Look closely. See how they watch you. See how they wait." Despite himself, Alex turned toward the walls where the photographs hung in their neat rows. In the darkness, he could barely make them out, but he could feel their presence. Dozens of eyes fixed on him, dozens of faces frozen in expressions of horror and realization. "What do you want me to do?" he asked into the phone. "Leave," the voice said simply. "Now, before it's too late. Before you become like us." "Like you?" "What are you?" But the line had gone dead. Alex sat in the darkness, holding the silent phone, his mind racing. Every rational instinct told him that this had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, maybe the hotel's way of creating an authentic ghost story experience for their guests. Maybe Mrs. Holloway was behind it, orchestrating phone calls and mysterious voices to enhance the atmosphere. But the voice had sounded so genuine, so filled with pain and regret. And there was something about the photographs, the way they seemed to capture not just images, but emotions, that felt too real to be faked. Thunder crashed outside, and the lights flickered again. In that moment of semi-darkness, Alex saw something that made his blood freeze. The photograph of James Morrison, the most recent guest, the man who looked so much like Alex himself, was no longer looking straight ahead as it had been before. The face in the photograph had turned slightly, just enough so that the eyes were now looking directly at Alex. When the light steadied, the photograph was back to normal. Alex rubbed his eyes, wondering if he was losing his mind. The stress, the exhaustion, the strange atmosphere of the hotel, it was all combining to create hallucinations, paranoid delusions. That had to be it. But as he sat there in the darkness, he became aware of something else. The sound of breathing that wasn't his own. It was coming from somewhere in the room, not from the telephone, which was still silent in his hand, but from the air around him. Soft, steady inhalations and exhalations, as if someone were standing very close to him in the darkness. Alex fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand and switched it on. The sudden brightness was blinding after the complete darkness, but as his eyes adjusted, he could see that the room appeared to be empty. Just him, the bed, the furniture, and the photographs on the walls. But the breathing continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, not from any specific direction, but from the room itself, as if the walls were breathing, as if the hotel was some vast living thing and room 606 was its lung. Alex got out of bed and moved toward the windows, thinking that perhaps the sound was coming from outside, wind through the trees or the storm itself taking on unusual patterns. But as he drew closer to the windows, he realized that he couldn't see anything through them. Not the darkness of night, not the storm clouds, not even his own reflection. The windows were completely black, as if they had been painted or covered with some opaque material. But when he touched the glass, it felt normal, smooth, cool, transparent. Whatever was on the other side simply wasn't reflecting any light. Or perhaps there was nothing on the other side at all. The thought sent a chill through Alex that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. He was 6 floors up. The windows should show the storm, the creek, the valley beyond. Instead, they showed nothing. As if room 606 existed somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that wasn't quite part of the world he knew. The breathing grew louder, more pronounced. Alex spun around, searching for the source, and his eyes fell on the photographs again. In the lamplight, they looked different than they had been before. The faces seemed more animated somehow, more aware. And as he watched, he could swear that some of them were moving their lips slightly, as if they were the ones doing the breathing, as if they were trying to speak. "This is insane," Alex said out loud, his voice sounding strange in the breathing room. "I'm having some kind of breakdown, stress-induced hallucinations." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. There was something too consistent, too purposeful about what was happening. The voice on the phone, the moving photographs, the windows that showed nothing, it all felt connected, part of some larger pattern that he couldn't yet understand. The telephone rang again. This time, Alex didn't hesitate. He snatched up the receiver before the first ring had finished. "What do you want from me?" he demanded. "To understand," the voice whispered. It was clearer now, more present, as if the speaker were in the room with him rather than on the other end of a phone line. "Join you where? Join you how?" "In the room," the voice said, simply. "In the photographs, in the collection." Alex looked at the walls.
Alex decided to test the boundaries of his situation. If room 606 was truly some kind of supernatural trap, there had to be limits to its power. The voice had said he could try to leave, that people had to choose to stay. That suggested some kind of rules, some kind of logic that governed what was happening. He dressed quickly, pulled on his jacket, and walked to the door. The brass handle felt normal under his hand, solid, real, reassuringly mundane. He turned it, and the door opened easily, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The sixth-floor corridor stretched away in both directions, exactly as it had when he'd arrived. The wall sconces provided the same dim lighting, and the dark carpet muffled his footsteps in the same way. Everything appeared normal. But as Alex stepped out of room 606 and began walking toward the staircase, he noticed something wrong. The hallway seemed longer than it had before, much longer. He had been walking for what felt like several minutes, but the staircase didn't seem to be getting any closer. And the doors he was passing weren't the same doors he'd seen on his way up. Where before there had been rooms numbered in the 600s, now he saw doors marked with strange symbols, not numbers at all, but intricate designs that seemed to shift and writhe in his peripheral vision. When he looked directly at them, they appeared to be ordinary door numbers, but the moment he looked away, they transformed back into something else entirely. Alex stopped walking and turned around. Behind him, the hallway stretched back toward room 606, but now it too seemed impossibly long. The door to 606 was just a distant point of darker wood against the burgundy walls, much farther away than it should have been. He was trapped in a corridor that defied geometry, walking on a path that led nowhere. "This isn't real," he said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the extended space. "This is some kind of hallucination." But as he stood there, he heard something that made his skin crawl. The sound of multiple doors opening simultaneously along the corridor. Click, 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 click. One by one, the doors on both sides of the hallway swung inward, revealing not hotel rooms, but deep, impenetrable darkness. And from that darkness came voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once in a whispered chorus. "Alex, Alex, come back. Don't leave us. Stay with us. Join us." The voices were coming from the open doorways, and as Alex watched in horror, he began to see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the thresholds. Pale figures, indistinct but unmistakably human in outline, reaching toward him with grasping fingers. "We've been waiting for you so long, so lonely, need someone new, need you to stay." Alex turned and ran back toward room 606, but the hallway seemed to stretch ahead of him endlessly. His footsteps echoed in the impossible space, and behind him he could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Can't leave, can't escape, part of us now, forever and always." The door to room 606 finally appeared ahead of him, and Alex lunged for it, grasping the handle and yanking it open. He stumbled inside and slammed the door behind him, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room felt different now, smaller somehow, more intimate, and the photographs on the walls were definitely moving, not just shifting slightly, but turning their heads to follow his movement, their expressions becoming more animated, more desperate.
Harold Whitmore in his Victorian suit was mouthing words Alex couldn't hear. Margaret Finch was reaching one pale hand toward the camera as if trying to break free from her frame. Robert and Helen Carver were no longer holding hands. Helen was pointing directly at Alex, while Robert appeared to be shouting something urgent. And James Morrison, the most recent guest, Alex's doppelganger, was no longer looking at the camera at all. His face was turned completely toward Alex, and his mouth was moving in clear, desperate syllables. "Run! Get out! Now!" The telephone began to ring again, but this time he could hear other phones ringing as well. Dozens of them, a cacophony of mechanical bells that seemed to be coming from within the walls themselves. As if every room in the hotel, every room that had ever existed in the hotel, was receiving a call simultaneously. Alex grabbed the phone in room 606. "You tried to leave," the voice said, but it was different now. Not the single cultured tone he'd been hearing, but a chorus of voices speaking in unison. "You tried to leave. You saw the others. You understand now." What are they? The figures in the other rooms. Previous collections. Other attempts by the hotel to preserve its guests. But those experiments were less successful. The people in those rooms didn't adapt well to preservation. They became something else, something hungry and desperate. And you're different? We are the success stories. We accepted our fate willingly, peacefully. We became part of room 606 by choice. The others, they were taken by force. And that's what happens to guests who try to leave. They join the others, the hungry ones, the ones who spend eternity reaching for something they can never have. We're offering you a better alternative. How is being trapped in a photograph better? Because we remember who we were. We retain our personalities, our memories, our sense of self. We can speak, think, observe. The others, they've become nothing but need and want and desperate hunger. Which would you prefer? It was a horrible choice. Become a conscious prisoner in a photograph, or become a mindless grasping thing in a dark room. But Alex wasn't ready to accept that those were his only options. "There has to be another way," he said. "Perhaps," the voices admitted, "but not one that we've discovered. We've been here for decades, some of us for over a century. If there were a way out, don't you think we would have found it?" Alex studied the faces in the photographs more carefully. They were watching him with a mixture of pity and hope. Pity for his situation, hope that he might choose to join them rather than face the alternative. "What about Mrs. Holloway? She's not in any of the photographs." The voices were quiet for a long moment. Then, reluctantly, "Mrs. Holloway is different. She made a different bargain." "What kind of bargain?" "She agreed to serve the hotel, to be its face, its voice. In exchange, she retains more freedom than we do. She can move through the building, interact with guests, maintain the illusion of normalcy. But she can never leave, and she must do the hotel's bidding in all things, including bringing it new guests. The hotel needs to feed, not on flesh or blood, but on essence, on the life force that makes people who they are. Each guest who stays provides it with nourishment. Mrs. Holloway ensures that there are always new guests to sustain it." I felt a chill of understanding. How long has this been going on? "Since the hotel was built, 1892. The original owner, Cornelius Riverside, discovered something when he was excavating the foundation. Something old, something that should have stayed buried. Instead of sealing it away, he built the hotel around it, thinking he could control it, use it. He became its first victim. And now it's been feeding on guests for over a century? Yes, and it's grown stronger with each feeding. Room 606 is its heart, its center of power. The other rooms are just extensions, tributaries that lead back to this central source. Alex walked to the windows again and pressed his face against the glass. The view was still nothing but impenetrable blackness, but now he could sense something moving in that darkness. Vast shapes that shifted and writhed like living shadows. "What's out there?" he asked. "The hotel's true form. What it looks like from the outside, from the space between spaces where it actually exists. The building you entered was just a facade, a lure to draw in prey." I pulled back from the window, my mind reeling. If the voices were telling the truth, then I hadn't just entered a haunted hotel. I'd been transported to some other realm entirely, a place where the normal rules of reality didn't apply. "The storm," he said suddenly. "When I was driving up the mountain, was that real?" "Real enough, but it wasn't just weather. It was the hotel calling to you, drawing you in. You
The moment the clock struck 3:06, everything in room 606 changed. The photographs began moving more frantically, their subjects pressing against the glass of their frames as if trying to break through. The breathing in the walls became more pronounced, almost gasping now, as if the room itself were struggling to contain something vast and desperate. And the temperature dropped so suddenly that Alex's breath became visible in white puffs. "Time is running short," the voices from the photographs pleaded. "The hotel grows impatient. If you don't choose soon, the choice will be made for you." Alex looked around the room, at the faces that had been watching him for hours. For the first time, he really studied their expressions, not just the horror, but the resignation beneath it. These people had given up, had accepted their fate, had chosen the safety of preservation over the uncertainty of life. But Sarah was right. He wasn't like them. Even at his lowest point, even when he'd felt most empty and hollow, he had never been someone who gave up easily. "I want to leave," he said firmly. The voices rose in a chorus of dismay. "You can't. You've seen what happens to those who try. You'll become like the others, the hungry ones." "Maybe, but that's my choice to make." He walked to the armoire and pulled it open. The clothes inside seemed to rustle and shift of their own accord, as if they were alive and resenting his intrusion. Alex pushed past them, searching for something he was certain had to be there. In the very back, behind suits from every era of the hotel's operation, he found what he was looking for. A small door, barely 3 feet high, cut into the back wall of the armoire. "Don't!" the voices screamed. "That way leads to the heart of the hotel, to the thing that sleeps beneath." "Good," Alex said. "Then maybe it's time someone woke it up." He pulled the small door open and crawled through. The space beyond was not another room, but a narrow tunnel that seemed to be carved from raw earth and stone. The walls were damp and covered with phosphorescent moss that provided just enough light to see by. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, and Alex could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. Behind him, the voices from room 606 were calling out in panic, "Come back! You don't understand what you're doing! It's not just your life at stake. If you wake the thing below, it might destroy everything." But Alex kept crawling, following the tunnel as it wound deeper into the earth. The air grew warmer as he descended, and he began to detect a new smell, something ancient and organic, like the scent of a forest floor that had been undisturbed for centuries. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. Alex emerged from the tunnel and stood up, brushing dirt from his clothes as he tried to take in his surroundings. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a cathedral,
with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. The walls were covered with the same phosphorescent moss, creating a dim green glow that illuminated the space just enough to reveal its contents. And what contents they were! The floor of the chamber was covered with hundreds of objects, personal belongings that seemed to span the entire history of the hotel. Suitcases from every era of the hotel's operation, clothing, jewelry, photographs, books, documents, all the earthly possessions of the people who had stayed in room 606 and never left. But at the center of the chamber, rising from the floor like some impossible tree, was the thing the hotel had been built around. It was difficult to look at directly. Alex's eyes seemed to slide away from it, unable to focus on its true shape. One moment it appeared to be a massive root system, gnarled and twisted, reaching up toward the ceiling with countless branching tendrils. The next moment it looked more like coral or like some vast fungal growth, its surface covered with pulsing nodes and hollow chambers. But whatever its true form, Alex could sense its awareness. It was alive, and it was watching him. "Welcome," a voice said, and this time it came not from a telephone but from the thing itself. The voice was vast, ancient, speaking directly into Alex's mind rather than his ears. "I have been waiting for you. You're the thing Cornelius Riverside found when he was building the hotel? I am much older than Cornelius Riverside. I am older than this mountain, older than the stream that runs through this valley. I have been here before your kind learned to make fire. But yes, Riverside found me, and in his greed and ambition, he chose to build around me rather than leave me in peace. And you've been feeding on hotel guests ever since?" "I have been surviving," the entity corrected, "trapped beneath stone and mortar, cut off from the natural world that once sustained me. The humans who stay in the room above, they provide me with the essence I need to continue existing. It is not ideal, but it is necessary." Alex walked closer to the thing, though he every instinct screamed that he run. "What are you exactly?" "I am what your kind might call a nature spirit, though that term is inadequate. I am the consciousness of this place, the living embodiment of the forest that once covered these mountains. When the trees were cut down and the streams diverted, when the land was scarred by mining and building, I retreated underground to wait for the world to heal itself. But instead, Riverside trapped you here. Yes, and now I am bound to this place, dependent on the hotel for sustenance. The guests who stay in the room above, they provide me with the essence I need to continue existing. It is not ideal, but it is necessary." Alex walked closer to the thing, though every instinct screamed that he run. "They don't see it that way. They're terrified, trapped." "Are they? Or are they simply experiencing existence in a new form? Death comes to all living things, but I offer something different, a kind of immortality, a preservation of consciousness that transcends the limitations of flesh." "I thought about the faces in the photographs, the desperate voices on the telephone. They want to be free. They want what all humans want, to continue existing while avoiding the pain and uncertainty that existence brings. I give them that. Perfect preservation, free from suffering, free from loss, but also free from growth, from change, from the possibility of joy." The entity paused, its massive form pulsing slightly in the green light. "Joy is temporary. Pain is inevitable. What I offer is eternal." "Maybe, but eternity without the possibility of change isn't living. It's just another kind of death." He walked closer to the thing until he was standing right beside one of its massive root-like appendages. Up close, He could see that its surface was covered with faces, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all pressed against the bark-like exterior as if they were trapped just beneath the surface. The faces of every guest who ever stayed in room 606. "You understand now," the entity said. "They are not gone. They are part of me, preserved within me, their consciousness merged with mine. They experience what I experience, know what I know. In a way, they have become more than human." "They've become nothing," Alex said. "You've consumed them, absorbed them, turned them into extensions of yourself. That's not preservation, that's murder." "Then what do you propose?" the entity asked, and for the first time Alex detected something like curiosity in its vast voice. "I cannot survive without sustenance. If I die, all those preserved within me die as well. Would you condemn thousands of consciousnesses to oblivion to satisfy your moral principles?" It was a question Alex hadn't expected, and it gave him pause. If he somehow managed to destroy this thing, would I be freeing the trapped souls or destroying them entirely? "There has to be another way," he said. "Perhaps, but not one that I can see. Unless… Unless what? Unless someone were willing to take my place, to become the new anchor for this space, the new keeper of the preserved souls, someone who could find a different way to sustain them, a way that doesn't require the consumption of new victims." Alex stared at the entity, understanding slowly dawning. "You want me to replace you?" "Not replace, transform. Become something new, something that bridges the gap between human and spirit. You could free those who wish to be freed while protecting those who choose to remain. You could end the cycle of consumption that has sustained this place for so long." "And what would happen to me?" 6 months later, the Riverside Hotel still stood in its valley beside Mill Creek. But it was different now. Cleaner, brighter, more welcoming. The storm that had surrounded it for so long had finally broken, and sunlight once again reached the building's windows. Mrs. Holloway was gone, released from her own binding when Alex had transformed the hotel's fundamental nature. In her place was a new proprietress, a middle-aged woman named Janet, who had answered a job posting that had appeared in newspapers across the region, though she couldn't quite remember seeing the actual advertisement. The hotel had guests now, real, living people who came to enjoy the beautiful mountain scenery and the peaceful atmosphere. They stayed in comfortable rooms, ate good food, and left with pleasant memories and photographs of their vacation. Room 606 was still special, but in a different way. It was the room where people came when they needed to make difficult decisions, when they were at crossroads in their lives and needed clarity about which path to take. Guests who stayed there often reported unusually vivid dreams, dreams that helped them understand themselves better. They never saw the photographs on the walls. To living eyes, the walls appeared to be decorated with pleasant landscape paintings. But the photographs were still there, visible only to those who existed between life and death. The people in the photographs were different now too. They looked more peaceful, more content. Some of them had chosen to fade away over the months, finding the courage to embrace whatever came after life. Others had decided to stay, becoming advisors and counselors to the living guests who stayed in their room. Harold Whitmore had become something like a therapist, his Victorian sensibilities somehow perfectly suited to helping modern people work through their relationship problems. Margaret Finch specialized in helping women find the courage to pursue their dreams. Robert and Helen Carver, still holding hands after all these years, offered guidance to couples facing difficulties. And Sheames Morrison had become Alex's closest advisor. helping him navigate the complex responsibilities of being the keeper of such an unusual place. Alex himself was changed beyond recognition, though he retained his essential personality and memories. He existed simultaneously in the underground chamber and throughout the hotel, able to appear to guests when they needed guidance, invisible when they needed privacy. He had found a way to sustain the hotel and its remaining trapped souls without consuming new victims. The building fed now on positive emotions, joy, love, hope, contentment, drawing just enough life energy from happy guests to maintain its existence without harming them. Visitors left the hotel feeling refreshed and renewed, carrying with them a sense of peace that lasted long after their vacation ended. Sometimes late at night, Alex would remember his old life, the law practice, the divorce, the emptiness that had driven him to this place. He wondered what Sarah was doing, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about him. He had tried to contact her once, appearing to her in a dream, to let her know that he was safe, that her words had saved him in a way she probably couldn't understand. She had seemed to hear him, to accept that he had found his place in the world, even if it wasn't the place she would have chosen for him. The Riverside Hotel was no longer a trap or a prison. It was a sanctuary, a place where the living could find peace and guidance, where the dead could choose their own fate, where the boundaries between life and death were thin enough to allow for understanding and healing. And at its heart, in a chamber deep underground, a man who had once been empty and hollow kept watch over it all, ensuring that the hotel's dark history would never repeat itself, that the cycle of consumption and imprisonment was finally, truly broken. The choice to stay had become paradoxically a kind of freedom. And room 606, with its windows that now showed the beautiful mountain valley beyond, welcomed new guests with the promise that whatever decision they came to make, they would make it freely, without coercion or fear. The storm had passed. The nightmare was over. And in its place was something unprecedented in the hotel's long history: hope.